who's joined us today, and the number of speakers that are with us as well. And welcome again. This is the EBRI webinar on the far-reaching implications of student loan debt. This is Stacy Schaus. I'm the current chair of the Employee Benefit Research Institute, and I'm very delighted to be the moderator for this very important discussion today. My bet is that most of you who are joining us today are affected by student debt in some way. Perhaps you're a millennial who's working to pay off your own debt, or a parent who is saving for your children's education, or possibly you are currently paying college bills for your children or other loved ones. Well, I have to say that I'm with you in helping to shoulder the cost of college education currently for my two children who are graduate school students. And just 2 weeks ago, as a parent, I received the most amazing news ever from NYU that my daughter's NYU medical school tuition going forward will be free. Yes, that's right. NYU is waiving the fee for medical school for all students. Wow. With a student halfway through medical school, this was a great burden lifted off of our shoulders. My daughter told me that her classmates were absolutely elated and that the entering first-year medical students were even more thrilled. But she also said, unfortunately, those who had just graduated and had just completed paying for 4 years of medical school education were not very happy at all. Clearly, they've missed this tremendous financial gift. And on average, these NYU medical student graduates are beginning their medical careers with $184,000 in student debt on average. Yikes. So as we all know, student debt in the U.S. is significant and can impact many other financial decisions that we all must make. This includes our saving for our own retirement. So in this call, I'm joined by 3 experts to discuss this topic and how employers may be able to help. First, we're joined by Craig Copeland, who is a senior research associate who has been at EBRI since 1997. And he focuses on all aspects of retirement, from coverage of workers to confidence of Americans in their retirement prospects. In today's call, we'll have Craig discuss recent research on student loans and financial well-being. Our second speaker will be Neil Lloyd, who is the head of U.S. EC and Financial Wellness Research at Mercer. And he's also the new vice chair of EBRI's Financial Wellbeing Research Center, which we're delighted to talk with any of you about following this call. Neil's comments will hone in on what employers can do to help employees with student debt repayment and the issues surrounding this entire topic. And finally, and very importantly, we're also very delighted to have Alex Smith here. She is the Chief HR Officer for the City of Memphis. And she will share with you details on a very exciting program that they've just put in place for student debt repayment. She'll tell us about the program, its features, and also how it's going thus far and how people have responded to it. So at the end of the call, we expect to have time for questions. So if you do have a question, we encourage you to type it into the web system, and we'll be able to see it here. Others on the call, as mentioned, will not be able to see your question. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. If we don't get to your question during the call, someone will follow up with you following the call. So with that, let me turn it over to Craig to start us off and talk about the research. Craig?
Thank you, Stacy. As Stacy mentioned, I'm going to go over the overview on the statistics of student loan debt from incidence to amounts still owed on it, the required payments, and then the effect of student loan debt on other specific assets, in particular DC retirement plan balances and home ownership. And then we're going to look at then what we found from our retirement confidence survey, the perceived helpfulness of certain financial well-being programs, in particular student loan debt assistance. As you can see, the data sources for all these statistics I'm going to be talking about, except for the RCS, is going to be from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances. So that's where we're getting all the data. And one thing to remember is that this data source, the unit of measurement, is the family. So we'll be talking about the family when we talk about these statistics. So we can see here that the growth in the percentage of families with student loan debt has grown tremendously since 1992. It's more than doubled from 10.5% to 22.3%. And when you look at it by the age of the family head, so this is by the head of the family, you can see that it's even much higher for those younger. For those less than 35, we see that it's reached almost approaching 50% at 45% essentially. And you get over a third for those with a family head 35 to 44. One thing to be clear is when we talk about the family unit, that means that the spouse, either the spouses or both the spouses could have student loan debt, but at least it's one of those two in the family that has the student loan debt when we talk about the percentage of these families. And one thing to notice about this trend is that the large increase for the youngest people really happened from 2001 to 2010, whereas the larger increase is now starting to happen for those a little bit older, those in the 35 to 44 and 45 to 54 range. So we can see that when we go to the distribution of the families based upon the age of the family head, we can see it's kind of moved away from just being a young person problem. When you go back to 1992, you see that right at 85% of the families had a head that was younger than 45 years of age. But now that's moved into a situation that's only 2/3 of the people. We've actually moved up more. We see that almost 20% are now have a family head in age 45 to 54. So certainly this isn't going to be just a young person problem now. It's starting to hit more and more of people as they go up the age range. Now, one thing that we can see also with the percentage of going up is we can also see the amount that's still owed has gone up. Each of these lines here is in real 2016 dollars. So these are real increases from 1992 to 2016. When we look at the bottom blue line, which is the median amount that's owed, we see that it's gone up from just over $5,000 to $19,000. So the median family that has student loan debt is owing $19,000 of what they have. We can see the average, which you kind of hear more about, which is in the $34,000 range, because that you have the really large people, like as the example Stacy gave about the medical student where they have over $100,000. You can see at the 90th percentile level, meaning this is the people that have 90th. Everything is below that. The 10% or above that is right at $80,000. So you can kind of see the range of the amounts that's owed at this. But we can see that it's been a large increase, 3 times from 1992, and it's increased a third since 2010 to 2016 for the amount owed. Now, what does this translate into monthly payments? We can see that at the median, the monthly payment is $200, and that represents about 3% of people's family income at the median for how much is owed, or how much is required to be paid each month. Remember, this is a required payment, so this is going to be taking the loan to the full extent of what the repayment period is, not in a way that you would probably want to get rid of it if you want to move on to going into other financial goals like buying a home or saving for retirement. And we can see that when we get out to the 90th percentile level, we see that 10% of the income, over $600 a month we're paying, have to pay for student loans. So we're talking about really a lot of money, but one thing is that it's $200 at the median for monthly, it's about 3%, which certainly would be a nice addition to a DC plan. But one thing that's interesting is that you can see that it's pretty much the same amount for each age group of families right at $200 for their median payment. The one thing that's different certainly is that the younger amount has a higher percentage of their income that's going in. We're at 4% of income at the median. So that means that there's half the people have something more than 4%, and you're certainly at a point where that's going to make a significant difference on whether you contribute to a DC or save for other financial goals. From there, we can look at what the impact is on other assets. In particular, we're going to look at the impact of a student loan on DC balances and on home ownership. So first of all, we have 2 different groups of people younger than 35. We're going to have people that actually get their college degree or higher, or we have people then that attend some college but do not get a bachelor's degree. So the blue and red lines are the groups for those with the college degrees. The green and purple bars are then those with some college. And you can see that each time on the left, that is the ones with student loans. So you can see that the families with student loans have lower DC balances across the entire distribution of people with a DC balance in both of those groups. And it's certainly there for those with some college as well. The other thing we notice, certainly the big difference between those people that have a college degree and those that don't have a college degree on their average balances in the distribution of balances as well. So certainly there's an impact of not getting the college degree on your financial situation, and also then the impact of having the student loan. So some of the people then that have the student loan and don't finish their degree are kind of getting hit both ways. They're not doing as well as those if they had finished their college degree, and they're not doing as well as those at their same education level, apparently because of the impact of the student loan. And then this carries on to another type of asset when we look at first of all, this continues on even as people get older. When we look at people 45 to 54 for the family heads, and we can see that again, these tremendous differences in the DC balance persist even as we get older, in a range that you would hope you'd have the benefit pays off, or have the loan paid off for certain aspects. But people still have these loans, and they're in a situation where they're having a lower DC balance, therefore they're less likely to be as better prepared for retirement when they hit age 65. So it's not only just the young people that have the impact on their lower income, on their lower DC balance from having a student loan. It continues on as you get older, and in some cases it looks like the amounts are even greater as you get older on this impact from having a student loan versus not having a student loan at the older ages. Now we move on to the separate asset of home ownership. And we can see that certainly there's a difference between those that have a college degree and have some college, and home ownership is higher for those with a college degree, as you expect. Those that have a college degree would have more likely to have better jobs and be able to buy a home. But we can see that there isn't much difference between those with the same education level when they're younger, like when they're less than 35 for the family head. There's virtually no difference between those bars. However, as you get out to the older ages, 45 to 54, there is a significant difference in home ownership between those with a student loan at the same education level for home ownership. And in fact, it's even greater for those with only some college degree. We can see that's less than 50% of those with some college that have a student loan versus 70% for those without a student loan. So again, as you get older, it looks like these effects seem to carry forward if you're getting these student loans in older age, when you have a chance to build up more assets. It's preventing that, as opposed to the younger age where you really haven't had a chance to present more assets. The difference is not as large, but it's still there. And so certainly it has an impact throughout the rest of your life of having the student loan versus not having the student loan. Now, with all this talk about a student loan, it's becoming harder. You can certainly see the great impact it's had on the younger people, where almost 50% of families headed by someone that's younger than 35, 50% of those have a student loan. Well, one of the questions we asked in our annual retirement confidence survey are various programs that employers can provide, like our financial well-being programs. And one of the things that we found, including the student loan debt assistance, is that we compared it to some other debt types of programs. We had debt counseling in general, or budgeting of day-to-day items as a way to make sure you address that you don't get into a debt situation, that you know what you're doing. So if you look at the far right bar, the orange bars, that's the overall. Certainly overall, the student loan debt assistance comes out lower than more the general age group or general type of debt programs, which are at 48%. However, when you get to the age differences, you see that across the three programs, student loan debt assistance is perceived to be as helpful for those people 25 to 34 as it is for the other types of programs. So certainly the student loan debt becomes very important. Student loan debt programs appear to be very important for those younger, and therefore that's certainly an issue that can come on if you're looking for younger people, is offering a program that helps them because this is one of the things that they're really looking for is help with the student loan debt. So this kind of goes over the highlights of what we had. Again, just quickly recapping of what we did. We can see that this is not a younger problem anymore. It's certainly going up into the higher families. The student loan debt is still increasing, and it's going to continue to, it appears to be continuing to increase. DC balance seems to have a lasting impact as you go into lower DC balance seems to be impacted as you go into older ages even more by having a student loan versus not having a student loan. And the perceived helpfulness of an employer offering a student loan debt assistance program is really pretty high for that age group, even though it's not as important overall. However, as you can see, the first bullet point where it's growing in older age, it appears that this is going to become also a more general interest thing as more and more older people with older family heads are going to have this problem too. So this kind of brings us into next, where I'm going to hand it over to Neil, that he can talk about some of what the potential programs that employers can offer. Neil?
Thanks, Craig. I think, you just really need to look at the press these days to realize that student debt is a key issue. And in fact, there's a website, studentdebtclock.org, where they actually monitor or they estimate the amount of student debt. And a couple of days ago, I looked at it and it was showing 1.58 trillion. I looked today, it was almost 1.59. But I mean, this gives an idea of the magnitude. So I'm going to talk about the role that employers can play and actually are playing to help people manage this problem. But just as a start, I thought I'd actually go back a step and actually go and look at some of the things that individuals can do on their own without needing the help of an employer. And really there's three sort of types of services that come up. I mean, one that we see in the market is student debt assessment. And some of these are available through public websites, and they help individuals determine what are the best things for them to do to manage their student debt. And generally the key objective is to find different ways of optimizing and ideally reducing future payments. So it could be recommending refinancing, it could be recommending something else, but that's one thing that can actually help people. Another one we see is loan consolidation. And that's a federal program, and what it really enables people to do is to combine all their federal loans. It doesn't actually result in any savings, but what it can help people, it's a lot easier to manage one larger loan than having multiple loans to manage. And for example, if you want to consider refinancing, which we'll move on to next, it can make that process a lot simpler too. So, I mean, I spend a lot of time traveling through airports, and I always notice the number of adverts that are there for student loan refinancing, particularly actually if you're wandering around California, I find as well. And there are a number of companies that have built very substantial businesses making available these refinancing services. And this can really result in significantly reduced student loan payments. And there's two key reasons for that. One is that federal loan interest rates do not respond as quickly to market interest rates. So often you can refinance a federal loan into a private loan, particularly if interest rates have been declining, and that can lead to quite a meaningful, potentially, reduction in student loan payments. The other one is that the interest rates applicable to private loans are very much a function of your credit worthiness. And if you look, as people's salaries and careers progress, particularly those who actually move maybe faster and have faster salary and career progressions, those people can often refinance their loans potentially more than once at further reduced interest rates as their credit worthiness improves. So, I mean, the message of the story is that even without employers, there are quite a few things that can be done. On the employer side, the employer can take it so much further, though. So, for example, one thing we've seen in place is we've seen employers offering refinancing with, for example, a single provider for one student loan refinancing company. The big advantage you see with this arrangement is that given that the employer is promoting the program, what tends to happen is incentives given to those individuals who refinance. And typically it can be a credit to their loan account of several $100s. So again, a better outcome than if they'd just done it on their own. A variation on that one is a marketplace platform. So this is where instead of connecting to a single provider, you see a platform which gets you a whole range of quotations from a whole group of providers. So think of an Expedia or a Travelocity or Kayak or student loans. And this again would come probably with a similar incentive payment of $100 into your account. On the loan management side, I think the student loan direct payment platforms or payment programs, and that's what Alex will talk about later, is where an employer will agree to pay an amount. It could be $100, might be $150 per month. In fact, it can be a lot more complex than that, but simply towards an individual student loan for a fixed period of time. We won't go into detail here, but there really are a range of different types of programs that you can put in place that really are there to focus on different concerns you have, maybe about attraction of attention, etc. Including there are some designs where that benefit increases with service. So the longer people stay with you, the better and benefit that benefit actually can get. The one we've referred to as the student loan 401k match. This is slightly different, and it attempts to address, I would say, the quandary that many people have. Do they pay back student debt, or do they contribute to retirement savings? And traditionally on 401k plans, if you contribute, the employer will match contributions into the 401k plan. Now with the student loan 401k match idea, employers will potentially accept that, okay, you don't have money to go and put money into 401k, but you are paying off your student loans. So employers will potentially match what you're putting into your student loan with an amount of money into your 401k plan. And I'll come back and I'll explain this a little bit later. The last one we mentioned is student loan assessment and management tools, which again, we mentioned them earlier, but these again can be made available. They actually often fit together with some of the platforms. So if you're having a student loan direct payment platform, you might also have this as well. And this might tell you, if the company's paying me $100 a month, which of my loans should it go, which should it pay back next, and maybe how can I better restructure the arrangements? Or do we think you'll be a really good candidate for refinancing? Now, there's a number of issues to consider for an employer being to seek, wanting to provide assistance. And two of the obvious ones are how much it's going to cost the employer. I mean, clearly budget's a big issue. But also, and the other one that can be a little more subtle, is understanding who will the arrangement actually benefit. And you'll see not all of these things benefit everyone equally. In addition, there are some complications to watch for, and we'll talk a little bit about those. So if we go back to the idea of the refinancing platform, and it doesn't really matter whether we're talking to a single partner or a marketplace, the real advantage here is this is actually pretty simple. There's limited effort needed from the employer. There's typically no cost to the employer. But where the challenge comes is that refinancing can be a really great help to those employees with high credit worthiness whose situation is improving. However, it can be less helpful to those with less attractive prospects. So for example, Craig mentioned the challenges of those people with student loans who do not graduate. Refinances, it may help them, but it's less likely to be of a significant help to them as well. And you need to sort of be aware of that. You can have some people in your group who actually really do really well out of it, and some other people have a different experience. The other one, and this is a bit of a nuance, is that if you do if someone does refinance a loan, they do lose certain federal protections, and that, so when refinancing, people need to evaluate the pros and cons. It's all well and good getting a lower interest rate and a lower payment, but are there some other protections that you might have lost at the same time? Now, I'll move to the student loan direct payment approach, and this probably has been the one that's captured the most attention in press headlines. I mean, according to the SHRM survey, it suggests that only 4% of employers offer such an arrangement. But there have been a couple of high-profile examples. And for example, in May this year, at the EB Policy Forum, we had Cindy Silver of Fidelity discussing how they'd introduced a program that paid some of their employees $2,000 per year for 5 years, paying a total of $10,000. And if you listen to Cindy, she'll talk about how this really had impacted them from an attraction point of view, really attracting people and retaining people. And we have anecdotally heard a number of other employers come back and say, company ABC has put this in place, and we're actually now struggling to actually attract employees because this thing is in place. The challenge, of course, is that the cost is high because suddenly you're paying at least $2,000 per year for all those with a student loan. But the other issue, and this is a bit more subtle, that comes up, is that when we talk to employers, you sort of realize there are two types of employers you deal with, or very sort of blunt as that, but there's two responses you get. One group who are uncomfortable with the fact that we are now looking after people with a student loan, but what about all those other loans? What about people with other debts? And I think some people actually think it can be discriminatory, and that issue can come up. The other one that comes up is that other employers are they're just very comfortable with the idea because they believe they're addressing a student loan problem. And the reality is most benefit programs in one way or another do discriminate and help some people and don't help others. When it comes to medical benefits, it helps the people who are more sick. It doesn't help the people who are never sick. I mean, that's the nature of benefit programs. But you definitely hit this debate with people. The final issue on this one is that the benefit is fully taxed in the hands of the employees. So if you pay $150 or $200 for them or $100, that's going to be taxed just as if their salary had been increased by that amount. So it's not particularly tax efficient, and I think a lot of people have pushed back on that, being not comfortable about that. Now, the other example we mentioned here is the student loan 401k match. And I think part of this idea came about because part of the reason that people quite like this is it avoids the tax problem, because the benefit you're going to give now is a 401k contribution, and that's not going to be taxed in the employee's hands. Now, what's interesting is the concept was talked a lot about a year or so ago, but it had actually quietened down until very recently, that is. The one thing though to be aware with this benefit, though, is that it does indirectly target student debt, because it's indirectly helping people who are paying off student debt, but it doesn't actually contribute money to pay off student debt. It's actually contributing money to help with retirement savings. So it is important just to be aware of that. But the reason I mentioned that this has suddenly gained a bit more attention recently is Abbott Labs. They actually have instituted a program like this, whereas I understand it, if an employee contributes 2% of payroll to a student loan, then at the end of the year, Abbott will pay 5% of payroll into the 401k program. One of the key items that's happened is that Abbott did actually obtain a private letter ruling from Revenue, and this has been publicized, which clarified that the way Abbott structured their program didn't create, it's technical, but a contingent benefit issue. But for other employers who want to go down this path, there's still a thing to look at. I mean, private letter ruling was applicable to Abbott only. So other employers will need to ensure they avoid any such issues. Coverage and non-discrimination testing can present problems, particularly if highly compensated employees are included. And also there can be a challenge with safe harbor plans. Nothing you can't get beyond, and I think that's what Abbott did. And certainly, I think given the reaction we've seen to the Abbott case, we anticipate more employers talking to us about exploring this further. The last thing I mentioned was we've seen employers offer student loan assistance or guidance platforms. Often this is actually a starting step, and the big advantage is the outlay for the employer is fairly limited, so it doesn't need a substantial budget to put this in place. But the other thing is that as people use the platform, use the guidance, we get more and more information about the employee's loans and what their real needs are. And that really can help to then come back later and say, we've seen the detail on our people, we know these are the key issues, therefore I would like a budget to do something that's maybe a little bit more substantial. One thing I mentioned, and I think you don't need to go through all these cases, was this issue of tax. And it's worth being aware there's actually quite a long list of bills that have been proposed to create a tax incentive for the direct payment benefit. So this is where the $100 is paid in by the employer. And I think in general, most of these bills seem to look at there's a tax exclusion for amounts paid in terms of tuition reimbursement benefits, and it's $5,250. And what they're trying to do is to say, can't we treat student debt repayments in exactly the same way and bring them under that $5,250 limit? The challenge, of course, with all of this is that tax reform, at least until recently, the priority has really been reducing tax rates and not really increasing deductions. However, we'll have to wait and see how this develops. The last slide I wanted to mention is that one thing we are seeing in the market is employers looking to combine student debt repayment with other benefits. And some of this is to address the discrimination concerns. So for example, instead of saying here's $150 for only people with student debt, they might say we'll offer $150, you can use it for student debt, or you can go and use it to contribute to a 529 plan. I mean, you do address some of the discrimination issues. Of course, the negative is there's a lot more money to spend, and that's something you have to go and work out from the budget point of view. We're seeing people who are looking at combining their student debt repayment programs together with tuition reimbursement. We've seen other things, that people just offering college coaching as a benefit in addition to student debt repayment programs. I think that what this all shows is that there really are many ways to address the student debt challenges, and employers are looking for different ways to address what is very much a challenging issue. But also, I mean, if you monitor this market, it really shows how innovative this market is. And one thing we've seen is that many employers actually start with a pilot study, again, to maybe address the initial budget concerns, with a small group of employees, actually see whether it works with a small group, and then expand that later. I mean, let's say minimize the budget impact, but it also enables you to check how successful that initiative is before you make that substantial commitment. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alex, who will provide color on the process the City of Memphis followed and the option they finally decided upon.
Fantastic. Thank you for passing over to me, and it was interesting to see your insights. Greetings. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Smith. I'm the Chief HR Officer for the City of Memphis, and I'm going to talk about our Student Loan Contribution Program, which we launched last year. So we can go to the next slide. I'd like to just give an overview of us as an employer. First of all, we have over 8,000 employees, roughly 6,500 full-time, 1,500 part-time. We started working on our student loan contribution program in early 2017 and actually launched it in July 2017. Thus far, we've had a 94% satisfaction rating with our participants. What's fascinating for us is when we went into this venture of wanting to go into student loan payment, we already had a tuition reimbursement program. And quite frankly, as a government entity, we were looking for differentiators to help us in recruiting and retaining talent for the city. In previous years, we had seen an uptick in attrition, particularly in police and fire. And with the new administration coming in, we wanted to look at innovative ways to attract talent and make us, more competitive, if you will, against other agencies. And so after doing some research and us knowing just in general about the student loan challenge, we decided to venture out and looking into a student loan program and was able to partner with Tuition.io to execute our program. And honestly, it's been a pleasant surprise for us on how successful the program has been thus far, and most importantly, how helpful it has been to our employees. So as you see on the slide, our average participant age is 41 years old. Immediately, many people think student loan debt is a young person's issue, if you will. And even for me, I suspected that our average participant age would be somewhere in the low 30s. And so I was really surprised actually to be at 41%. And then from a largest division participation standpoint, it's our police division at 41%. once again, I'm thinking that our law division, finance division, some of our more professional areas would have a higher participation in the program. But the fact that our boots on the ground police division is actually our highest participant was also surprising. And then also to look at the amount of student loan debt that our employees have. So $19 million and an average balance of $42,000. And, you know, the average salary here at the city of Memphis is around $45,000 a year. So you have people who are carrying possibly more debt than what they actually make in 1 year. That, for me, was a startling statistic and helped me to see that student loan debt not only is let's say, a white-collar issue, but it really is a blue-collar issue, and it's impacting more people than I would have ever imagined. And so right now we have 400-plus employees that are participating, or about 7% of our eligibility of participants. So far we have saved 249 years in payments for our employees, and 232,000 total saved. If we go to the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about how our program is structured. So today, not only are we, City of Memphis is one of 4% of the U.S. employees, but we're really, at this time, not only the first public sector entity, but my understanding is still the only public sector entity that actually has a student loan contribution program. So we are definitely at the bleeding edge and leading in this space. In terms of eligibility, we offer the program to our full-time employees who have at least a year of service with us, and it's for loans that are actually in their name, that are ready to be paid. We contribute $50 per month. There's no maximum on it. And we essentially make it an equal opportunity ability for everyone to participate in this benefit. If you go to the next slide, slide 28 or 30, you'll see that the average debt is quite fascinating when you look across our divisions. So as I mentioned, you know, police services being our biggest division, where we have participation. Their average debt is $40,000 a year. The average salary for a police officer right now is about $56,000 a year. You see across the board, just fascinating the amounts of debt. Now, some things you would anticipate, for example, our city attorney's office, where all of our attorneys sit, they have the highest debt, which makes sense. But once again, you know, everyone may perceive that the student loan debt issue is a white-collar issue, but you can see that we have debt across all of our divisions in municipal government, and so it's an everyone issue. If you go to the next slide, slide 31, you'll see by age. Now, this was fascinating. Once again, I thought the skewing would be towards employee or younger employees, but the fact that we have employees from the age of 21 all the way to 64 who have student loan debt was startling for me, and particularly when we talk about retirement, people are struggling with not only having to pay student loan debt, but meet their other financial obligations. And then on top of that, try to save for retirement, may have some challenges with that. So for us, we definitely see the student loan contribution program as really being not only an important benefit, but also a financial wellness conversation for our employees as well, and looking at how we can, you know, truly help them make wise decisions financially, but also help to alleviate some of the burden that they have on the, from day to day. And then on the next slide, you'll see some of the results we received so far. So we have surveyed our employees to see, you know, whether or not there is a difference between those enrolled in the program versus not enrolled, and how they perceive their experience at the City of Memphis. So in the first question, I'm likely to stay with the City of Memphis, we see a drastic difference between how people who are enrolled feel. So you have over 69% who, you know, agree or strongly agree that they're likely to stay, versus a smaller percentage with those not enrolled. And then on the question, would I recommend City of Memphis as an employer of choice, we obviously see a a starking difference between those agree and strongly agree to that question versus those not enrolled. So we have seen the results that let us know that this program does make a difference for our employees, not only financially, but also in their engagement with us as an employer. And so we're looking to continue to invest in the program as well as other financial wellness tools as well to help make a difference for our employees. So thank you. I appreciate the time to talk about what we're doing at the City of Memphis, and would like to pass it to the moderator to continue the program.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you everyone who's on. We have received a lot of questions, so and some of them are related to the same types of topics. So I'm going to take a question first back to Craig, which is looking at the older folks, or the older cohort that have the student loan debt, and where is it coming from? Because several of the callers have asked, does this include Parent Plus loans? Does it include co-signing on loans? Is this money for the individual who's taking on graduate studies or something later in life? So basically, or bottom line, Craig, if you could talk about what's driving the trend and what's in it. Thank you.
Certainly, one of the big factors of the growing amount is that they're paying for the children. They're taking on loans for their children in their name. So any of the various loan programs that, whether it's the Student Plus or whatever that you have, you can see that for those 55 to 64, about 60% of families that have student loan debt are paying for their children's education, whereas it's only 40% that are paying for their own. So there is some people still either going back to college or went back to college in their 40s and are still paying for it in their 50s. Again, we see that even 45 to 54, we can see that there's about a third of the people are paying for their children's education at that age, and 2/3 are still paying for their own education. And again, so that includes all the types of student loans, whether they're taking it in their own name, anything that they're required to pay back that's in their name, whichever various program they have is included in that. And so that would be the various different loans that they could have, they talk about. But there still is, even for 45 to 54, there's a great deal that's for their own education. So in a lot of cases, people are going back to school trying to advance their position, either going to graduate school, or in some cases it's people trying to get a first degree or get a second degree because they're changing jobs or changing careers. So there's a lot of people in that situation. One of the things we've seen that is that certainly the online options that are making it easier to go back to school while still working, and certainly they have a history of being able to get people to have student loans, and certainly that's an issue that's come on for those types of programs that haven't done as well as getting people jobs after they've had it. So that's been an ongoing issue that certainly has played into the student loan debt for this age group.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And then let's go back to Alex. One of the listeners asked about the specifics on the program in the city of Memphis and whether the average amount of debt includes Parent Plus loans for that program.
It does not. So the loan eligibility has to be loans that are carried by the individual.
Okay, thank you. So let's go on and ask a couple of other questions that have come in. One of the questions are, thoughts around the IRS private letter ruling, and Neil, you talked about that a bit, but on where this might go in the future, and you've already said quite a bit, but the listeners are interested in the projection for those types of programs.
I think, I think we're going to have to see. What we found, I would probably go back 18 months or so, when we spoke to clients about student loan direct payments, again, some clients wanted to do it, but quite often the tax issue came up and people were uncomfortable with that. And then people were, at that point in time anyway, more open to talk about the 401k idea because they're more comfortable. It seemed an alternative they could consider. But for a number of reasons at the time, it didn't progress. I think the fact that no one had done it, I mean, people were trying to see someone else, so really great for ABBA to sort of pave the way. But there are some other issues that come up. I mean, you've got to realize that it doesn't quite address student loans. It actually more addresses retirement savings. So one thing that will be interesting to see is, what is the reaction to it in the same way? I mean, we've seen a very positive reaction to direct payments. Will we get as positive a reaction to the 401k match? And the other issue is you've got to deal with discrimination testing issues. I mean, I think that's, you can't really do it for highly compensated employees. So you then may need to think about some other type of arrangements. So I think what we're expecting right now is to get a lot more questions. I don't think the private letter ruling told us much that we didn't think anyway, but I always explain a story that we actually asked our legal people a while ago, what do you think of student loan 401k match, expecting a one-paragraph answer. And they sent back an 8-page summary of all the issues. And it wasn't they did it wrong at all. I mean, what they did was exactly right. They said, you've got to do this, and therefore contingent benefits will probably be fine, which is really what the private letter ruling mentioned. But there are other things to go through, and I think so it's great that Abbott have done it. We're going to see. I mean, some people are wary of mixing the 401k, which has, a lot of other issues going on with the 401k plan with student debts, but we'll see. I mean, I suspect there'll be a lot more traction than, I think we definitely get a lot of conversation that's about to go ahead, and the more other companies to do this, the more feedback we're going to get, and we'll see.
Okay, thank you, Neil. And this one is going back to Alex. One of the listeners asked, they wanted to know if they're a parent who took out a student loan in their name for their child, which then the parent needs to repay. Is the parent eligible, or a Memphis employee, are they eligible for your program? And so in other words, this is an employee, a Memphis employee that paid for their child, and they're asking whether they would be able to qualify for the program, even though the money wasn't for themselves, it was to pay for a child.
That's a very complicated question. I think, on the face of it, if it's in the parent's name and it's solely for the parent, then it would be included. So essentially that's really what we're most concerned about is who actually is the holder of the loan.
Okay. So, Alex, let's stay with you. I mean, when you went in to seek approval for this program, what are some of the obstacles that you ran into, and if you were to give advice to others who are considering offering these types of programs, what would you advise?
Sure. So from a change management standpoint, one of the first things that we did was talk about it with our senior leadership team. So as Chief HR Officer, I report directly to the mayor and sit on the senior leadership team. And so as a part of my weekly presentations in that meeting, I brought this forward and discussed it with our senior leaders. Once I received their support for piloting the program, we actually piloted the program internally with a small group to see whether or not there was interest, whether or not there was understanding and even excitement about the program. And once we piloted and got very positive results from the pilot for about 90 days, that's when we were able to bring it in our budget and get it approved by City Council, and then bring the program fully forward in our new fiscal year. In terms of challenges, certainly understanding the technology was one piece, and making sure that it would work seamlessly with the current applications that we have was important. Two, communication, and so helping employees understand this as a benefit and why it would help them, and particularly that it wasn't about the city paying their actual student loan payments, but that this was a contribution towards the principal. And so that was an important talking point that we had to talk through, in addition to speaking towards what loans were actually eligible for the program. So we were able to get past that. I think the last piece that has been, difficult is, we wish we could do more, and so from a budget standpoint, we're only able to do so much. And so I think that's something you just have to, properly set expectations in terms of what the benefit is and what's the most fiscally responsible amount of budget that you can set aside for this type of program. And so we, based on looking at our budget, $50 a month is what we can do to be able to manage the program properly. Certainly, if I had more money, I could do more, but that is where it is.
Okay. And a follow-on question from one of the listeners is on whether you make the payments directly or you have an outside vendor who's managing the entire program for you. Not to name the vendor, but just do you have someone that you're outsourcing this to?
In short order, yes. So we have a partnership, and through that partnership and through their platform, that's how we're able to manage the program. And essentially the way it works is that we pay the vendor, and then the vendor pays the student loan companies directly. And so they are essentially, the vendor is actually really managing, if you will, the actual contribution directly to the student loan vendors.
Okay, great. Okay. Let's go back to Neil. Neil, how big a priority is student debt for employers, and where does this rank compared to other benefit priorities?
I mean, it's interesting because Craig showed some numbers earlier, which, in a way, I can't remember the three, but one was debt and one was something else, and almost student loans look like the third one. And I think we see that it's a very topical issue. I mean, it was even discussed in the presidential debate a couple of years ago. But actually, when you actually go and ask employees which one comes up at the top, it actually doesn't come up at the top. It comes up as sort of, say, 3 or 4. But the thing that actually a lot of those sort of measures sort of probably forget is, or don't actually focus on, is that, and I think that you can see it in some of the numbers that Craig had, is that student loans are a very, very significant issue for some people. So it's almost the extremes that are more, I mean, everyone may have an issue with debt, but the people who've got an issue with student loans, it's a very, very burdensome issue on top of them. And, that I hadn't thought about it before like that, but just having a loan that's more than your annual salary, I mean, is quite sort of intimidating. And it's also often the people who have it are a very key demographic. There may be a group of people that you actually want to recruit or something like that, or retain. So I think that if you do a straight survey of your employees, it won't come up at the top. But I think in terms of priorities with employers, we find it is a discussion point much higher up on the list. I mean, it comes very quickly.
Okay. And given we only have a few more minutes, I was thinking it might be helpful for the speakers to make any final comments or advice that they may have. And we could start with Craig, if you have any closing comments that you would want to make.
One thing that's clear is that this is going to continue to be a growing issue, and as you can see that it's more people than just the young people. It's going to be older. As the city of Memphis found that it's much older than what they expected. So this problem isn't going away. It's going to be a continuing issue because the cost of education is continuing to increase. And employers are, as Neil pointed out, that these are the employees they want to attract and retain that have this debt, because they're the ones getting the college education or getting the advanced degrees that they're attracting. So certainly employers are going to be looking at this, and it's going to become important aspect for trying to get people into these programs, through these funds, to get them to stay in the employer. And it seems to have lifelong consequences for those with student loans. It seems to have an impact throughout the rest of their life. So certainly if it's become a very issue, because if you start off with this debt, it makes it very hard to catch up the rest of the way in your life.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And Neil, any last comments or observations?
I think it really helps when you're going down this path. I mean, there's a lot of money involved. I mean, do what you can to understand your participants. I think that Alex's experience where, it wasn't necessarily who you thought it was, I think we see that all the time. So I think the more you understand, the better you can actually structure a program that will actually meet your needs. And again, just like Alex did, having a pilot where you maybe just try with a small group, you learn things from that. That can definitely help. It's a small budget commitment initially, and it can definitely help you motivate it the second time. So, it's a very innovative area and definitely worthwhile exploring.
Great. Thank you, Neil. And Alex, congratulations on your program and launching it and being one of the pioneers in this area. Do you have any closing comments or suggestions for the listeners?
Yes, I think, number one, this is at the heart of this is about taking care of your employees. And the student loan debt issue affects everyone, not just your top executives, but also your janitorial staff and everyone in between. And so I think it's important, for those particularly who are HR professionals who care about culture and climate of the organization, to be thinking about, this type of program as a means of really helping their employees with financial wellness, which is important. I also want to clarify a point earlier in terms of our program. The loans really are for our employees that who have incurred debt, and so the loans can be eligible if someone's consolidated with someone else or it's under the participant's name. It cannot, loans that are used to pay for someone else's education are not eligible. So I just wanted to clarify that point since somebody else had that question.
Okay, well, thank you, Alex. And we've reached the end of our time, so we have not gotten to everyone's questions, so we will follow up. I'd like to thank everyone again. Thank you to Craig and Neil and Alex for an engaging and illuminating discussion on the far-reaching implications of student loan debt. We hope that all of you have found this webinar valuable. If you are not yet a member of the eBree Financial Wellbeing Center, we encourage you to join. If you have any questions on the eBree research presented today or would like to discuss becoming a member of the Financial Wellness, please contact Craig Copeland at copeland@ebree.org. And please keep an eye out for future invitations to eBree webinars. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.